And we're up. What's up, everyone? This is Carlos from Midwestern Marks.
I'm Eddie from Midwestern Marks.
And we wanted to come on here and sort of do a post election analysis, talk about the election of Joe Biden now and how that relates to our organizing in the next 4 years. Um, so, Eddie, what do you think? What's your take on the election of Joe Biden?
Um, well, first of all, I've been the biggest one poo-pooing the you're gonna push Biden left narrative. Obviously, like we're communists. We do not believe Joe Biden will get pushed anywhere to what we consider to be like reasonably left. But I did start this petition that's now at 20,000 signs to get him to do an executive order on day one of his presidency to end child separation at the border. So I think one of our tasks organizing over the next 4 years can be to win these small material victories where we can, where we're making, people's lives better, the victims of imperialism, the refugees who come here and then have children, so we know that trauma affects a child's brain, more than anything. That's what you're taught in like social welfare classes and psychology classes. So one, these kids are leaving a war-torn country, and then two, once they get to where they think is going to be safety, the United States, they're being torn from their parents, which is a whole nother level of trauma because their parents at that point are their only conception of home because their home is gone, they're on the run. So it's, if we can get Biden to really end that, I mean, that's a good thing. So that's one place we can focus, I guess. That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I remember after Bernie had just dropped out, feeling such a feeling of despair. Um, it started off real well. I think I remember seeing in the Hill and stuff comments like no one has ever lost the first two states. No one has ever won the first two states and then ended up losing. Um, so I mean, I thought it looked good that we were going to be able to have that sort of, what's called 21st century bill of socialism or whatever, which is just really an expansion of the of rights. Um, but that didn't happen, and I was left in a position of despair. And I think that the conclusions that I've gotten since is that I don't think we're going to be able to do um, much within the party. I do agree we might be able to get things done here and there, um, but I don't think there's much work we can do within the party. Working within the party is always sort of working within the limits of what the oligarchs are handing to us. We're not setting our own sort of parameters, and I think there's a way in which we can set our own parameters, especially starting now. Um, After Bernie dropped out, I thought about the possibilities of like a third party movement, either the Greens or Party for Socialism and Liberation, and there really wasn't enough time, and we had the figure of Trump that I think everyone agrees that we had to get rid of. Um, but I think that now we're in such a unique position for organizing, right? Because we don't have this Trump figure anymore. We can directly do socialist organizing, which I think in the last 10 months or so, we've done a lot of anti-Trump organizing, um, along with socialist organizing. But it's been, we've always known that at the end of the day, when we step to the ballot box or when we mail in our ballot, it's going to have probably Biden in there. Um, I know you went with Biden, I went with Biden. The Communist Party USA was endorsing Biden, so was DSA. They weren't officially endorsing, but just pushing people to vote against fascism. So um, I just I wanted to have this talk to sort of center a perspective that I think it's very easily overseen. Um, like the election ends and then like people feel like they could sort of depoliticize and relax for a little bit, especially since the result was not a Trump win. And I think that now is when we have to really take advantage of. And I mean, you and me always talk about this, not necessarily on camera, but the relationship of material and ideological conditions. The material conditions are here in the U.S. We have had our natural 8-year crisis of capitalism, and that's been exacerbated by a pandemic and a brutal dealing of it by capitalism. So we've had, I think, at one point, 40 million people who are unemployed because of the pandemic, which in a country where you don't have universal health care, that means you've lost your employer related health care in the middle of a pandemic. So the conditions in the working mass of our country, at least materially, they're in the right, they're where we would want to approach them at, right? It's hard to do revolution like in 1950s America, where one job is enough, and you have a sort of a weird welfare state where the working class is actually doing good. But we have a working class and a sort of young generation that is looking at the future, and their future looks pretty dull. But they're still fighting. They still have hope. But I think the time is now to really take advantage of that and try to do something about the subjective condition, and relate all of these issues that people are mobilizing around to the heart of the problem, and that being capitalism. But
Yeah, I think I don't know, maybe not one of the mistakes we've made, I guess I'll say, is like really celebrating politicians like AOC and Ilhan Omar getting elected. Like, it's nice that we have these politicians who are taking the word socialist, and using that as a label, and who are pushing for these things like Medicare for all. But like you said, there's not much that can be done through the Democratic Party right now. And what can be done through the Democratic Party should mostly be done in connection with the unions, with the material base, the workers, whether that be strengthening unions, promising to fight right to work, endorsing Medicare for all, because we know most unions spend their time bargaining for healthcare, or like we were talking about, just organizing along class lines, like Big Bill Haywood argued for, if we can have politicians in the party who are connected to IWW. But I mean, yeah, we need to. And what I tried to do during the election was not talk about the election, right? Talk about capitalism, talk about how the base of our society is inherently flawed. And, to the extent that I talk about the election, it's that both these candidates are not going to change these things, which is what we have to argue all the time. And, during the Bernie campaign, maybe we didn't do that so much because we were just arguing his specific policies, I guess, which is good. But we need to show people that the heart of the system is broken and get them to engage in class struggle. Like, that's the main thing. And then the last thing I want to say is the dynamic has definitely changed. So since I've been like in politics, like actively organizing and creating content and whatnot, there's been multiple dynamics. So it was one, we're working for Bernie, so we just hated liberals. Like, liberals were the enemy. We're like, how are you supporting these corporate warmongers? This is insane. Bernie's so obviously the best candidate. And then all the news media, the DNC, the whole freaking neoliberal establishment was against us. And then after Bernie lost, we hated, we got angry for a while, but eventually everyone kind of did the settle for Biden thing, and it became like, all right, let's get Cheeto Man out of here or whatever. And liberals were kind of our allies for a while. And now I'm noticing on TikTok, a lot of my liberal followers are very surprised that like the last 5 videos I've made are calling Biden a piece of shit. So they're like, oh, I thought this guy just hated Trump, So the dynamic's different once again.
yeah, it definitely does feel like we're sort of back to a similar dynamic that we were in during the primaries. We organized together, for those watching, and we spent countless hours organizing for Bernie, knocking doors, talking to students. And I I couldn't agree more. We have a complete change of dynamic right now, and with that sort of change of dynamic towards a similar one that we were in with Bernie, now we've sort of lost the concreteness that we had with Bernie. Because at least with Bernie, we had a vessel that we can organize around. And the thing about the U.S. left is that at the moment there isn't like a Bernie figure. There isn't a sort of a popular party that stands for the similar issues. Like we know that the Communist Party, they have their Bill of Rights. Socialism is basically a Bernie's platform, right? It's stuff that if that most of the population agrees with, I
Wait,
think
time out though. I have a firm disagreement. You said there's no Bernie-like figure in the U.S. who's super popular, but look at us. I mean, that's us.
yeah, that's what we're trying to do, and I think that we have organizations like DSA that I think they just hit like 80 or 90,000 members. You have the Communist Party, you have PSL, the Greens, and they're all sort of aiming for a Bernie-esque, at least initially, a Bernie-esque agenda. And we know that that Bernie-esque agenda, that sort of social democracy style, is quite popular among Americans. Like most of the policies that Bernie had on his platform, they were supported like almost 80% by Democrats and like 50 or something by Republicans. So I think that we're in a unique position, considering the pandemic and the crisis, to and I think the only way we can really take advantage of this position is if all of the leftist organizations sort of have a central common plan that they're really going to focus on. And I think that this plan has to somehow be related to organization on class lines. With Bernie Sanders, the sort of traditional Marxist formula for grabbing power by the working class was inversed. We had a political movement that within its policies was the sort of expansion of economic rights and economic power for workers. It's usually the other way around. For our young listeners, I know we have a bunch of them, the traditional Marxist framework states that you organize where exploitation is really going on. You organize in the economic level along class lines, right? And then from that economic organization, now you have the state by the balls. Now you can start your political run. So I think there has to be a sort of common on umbrella in which the different leftist organizations in the US meet, realize that they share a lot more than what they differ in, and having a plan to address organizing along class lines. Have a plan that somehow inputs people from the different parties, whichever region, whichever party is more popular. Like if the Greens are more popular in the Midwest or whatever, have the Greens sort of lead the Midwest region, or but just have our organizing be based not so much on movements and the electoral arena, but let's try to focus the next few years on really getting people that are similar minded to workplaces, and so from there spread our information. And what I've found, and I know it's probably the case with you, is that when we talk to working class people, um, I, I'm someone who's in academia right now, um, and I feel like when I talk to someone in the working class, there's very little that I'm telling them that they don't already know in some form of like personalized way. They feel uh, capital sort of bearing down on them in their everyday life. So there's a sense in which we're really just putting words to what they're already feeling. But we have to get there. If we don't get there, we're not doing much. Um, and once we get there, we can start thinking about a sort of political vessel. Um, but my biggest fear is that we latch our organizing to just movements, um, and forget to do the sort of central part, which is the economic organizing. or that we eventually, in 2, 3 years from now, start organizing again for PSL or for the Green Party in a presidential ticket without having done what we had to do before.
Yeah. And I had a couple things to say. One, I want to say, and I want to start arguing for like strictly socialism, like fuck social democracy at this point. Like, and then when there are politicians arguing for like social democratic positions like Medicare for all, it'll make their job easier because we're going to be arguing for Cuba style system implemented in the US, so when someone says, no, actually Medicare for all is the half measure, people can start to conceptualize a public option as actually a far right-wing thing. It was cooked up in a right-wing think tank by like Milton Friedman, and now's our opportunity to do that. Like during Bernie, we were just trying to get him elected, right? So we're arguing based on what his political agenda was, which was social democracy. But now, like you said, there's kind of a lull. We don't have to do that anymore. Like I'm planning this big long video where I'm going to talk about eco-socialism and, the concept of metabolic rift in capitalism. It's like, now's the time to talk about that kind of stuff, I guess. Now's the time to get people thinking and interested in these bigger issues, and then get them into organizations where they can do something about it. And then part of the reason there's so much factionization and so much, disunity within the left that seemingly over nothing is because, am I frozen?
Yeah, you're kind of frozen, but your voice is
Hear
still.
me though?
Yeah, I could hear you fine.
Okay. But yeah, the reason there's no unity, part of it is because we're not actually doing class struggle, like we're not actually really doing anything in the US at this point. There'd be a lot more unity if we were actually focused on some serious goals. So I think that's our job over the next 4 years, and then hopefully we'll be able to field a presidential candidate at some point who's somewhat, who's further to the left of Bernie, who makes a real splash in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that, especially considering how poll after poll, even for God's sakes, Fox News polls are coming out, and it's an overwhelming majority that support the sort of policies that Bernie was proposing. I think that now is the time where we can address that sort of populace that agrees with those policies and help them realize that look at how far the Democratic Party went to have the one candidate that was actually going to fight for that not be elected. The only way we can have these policies is through a truly socialist agenda. And from there, we can definitely explain how even more radical policies should be on the table. How, as you said, single payer healthcare is a midpoint. That a national health system would be so much more efficient. With the federal jobs program, for example, that Bernie had, making that in a way in which that we expand nationalization of industries so that we're not leaving stuff to the anarchy of the market or for private enterprises to just go overseas for cheap labor. So, and I know, have an expansion of Bernie through a vessel that's actually going to empower workers and not just provide this sort of capitalism with the happy face capitalism with reformist policies that might alleviate some things, but that don't really change the power dynamics of the society as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, like when it comes to a national health service, there's rural areas where there aren't hospitals and stuff. So there are issues where we can win over voters who typically aren't likely to vote Democrat or whatever because they don't have any hospitals in their area, which is funny because that's a problem that they had in pre-revolutionary Cuba, which is what they did afterwards was they built hospitals in all these rural areas, which is pretty funny that the US today, which is supposedly the richest and best country in the world, has a problem that revolutionary Cuba solved. But there's ways to make these arguments, like for a national health service. And honestly, I find it easier to argue from a strict socialist position than a social democratic position because, like, I don't know, it's more correct. So it just is easier to argue with people, especially with workers, like you were saying. Theory was made from the material reality of the world. So if you just talk to them and hear where they're coming from, like you said, you can always connect what's going on in their life to capitalism in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember this one event where I was doing organizing for Bernie, and it was in our university, and I went up to a group of kids, two of them who were Republicans from working class families, and one of them who was a Democrat, but came from a sort of petty bourgeois family. His dad owned quite a bit of land and stuff. Um, so I was talking to them, and the Bernie agenda was sort of interesting to them, and they asked me, what are you? Are you just like a social democrat? And I was like, oh no, I'm a communist. And they
Yeah,
giggled. They giggled, and then they asked me, oh, what's that? And then when I started explaining what we meant by communism, I saw that the two Republican kids were a lot more interested when I was mentioning what I meant by communism and socialism than with Bernie's platform. Because to some extent, by the mere fact that Bernie's platform wasn't really shifting power to workers, it does kind of have that sort of utopian element to it, where it's I don't want to call it a handout, but it's just the type of reformism which just leaves the power still in the hands of the same people, and it's just those same people that are giving out a little more in order to sort of maintain, like, with the Romans, you give the people entertainment and food and alcohol, and they won't rebel, right? You give the people healthcare and free education, and you eliminate their debt, and they won't rebel, and they'll be satisfied with capitalism with the human face. And that's very scary for us socialists and communists. But I felt in that moment that they sort of realized that one option might give you something very similar, but it's missing something that's not really too visible, right? So Zizek has this great example of coffee, and he's an old Slovenian example. And someone goes into the coffee shop and they ask for coffee. They ask, is this the store where I can get coffee without milk? And then the barista says, no, this is where you get coffee without cream. The store with coffee without milk is on the other end. At the end of the day, the person was just getting coffee. It was, you can interpret it as the same order, right? But there was that surplus element that was missing in each case. And when you look at the agenda that the Communist Party or the Green Party or PSL or even DSA, the agenda that they're promoting is right along with Bernie's. But why were these kids more interested in what I was proposing with communism, which had a lot of the same things that I was talking to them about with Bernie's platform? And I think that's that surplus element, that the same as the example of the coffee, that they realize in one case, yes, I'm getting this, but what is missing about it is also part of what is there. And what is missing about the agenda that Bernie had cannot be just looked at as what is missing, but also as a component of it. And what was missing, which is also a component of it, as I mentioned, is that actual form of empowerment of the working masses, which when you promote the same sort of policies through an actually revolutionary party, with actual end goals of empowering the working class and a dictatorship of the proletariat and a society that provides actual democracy, not just bourgeois democracy, that even though you're offering, in a sense, the same thing at first, it carries a whole different baggage. And in that baggage, I think working class people can identify more with it, or at least that's been my experience in practice. I have found, for some reason, and it might be quite paradoxical to actually think of it, but I have found that working class Americans actually relate more to to these policies when you encompass it within a framework that is actually trying to empower workers than when you just put it within a social democratic framework that is really just capitalism with the structures necessary for the working class not to rebel.
Yeah, I was reading Imperialism, and I wrote in the book on one of the pages about Kautsky or Kautsky. I don't know how you pronounce it. Do you know?
I think it's just Kautsky.
Kautsky, yeah. And I'm like, who is Kautsky today? And like the more I thought about it, I'm like, it's freaking Bernie. Like the opportunist social democrat. Obviously, the material conditions are not the same here as they were in 1917 Russia. And I like to think that if Bernie was in 1917 Russia, he would have been on Lenin's side. But it's kind of the social democratic positions, right? Like, oh, let's just pull out of all these wars. Like, no, if Bernie would have got elected, it would not have been that easy because the military industrial complex is so powerful. Like, there's almost no way he would have maybe gotten minor troop withdrawals, but he would not have dismantled the empire because imperialism is is something that is a product of capitalism. It's not a product of having a mean president who decides one day he wants to invade a country. There are people planning these things to maximize their own material benefit. And I mean, that's the truth. And unless we're saying that, I think we're doing a disservice. And I've been, it's hard for me because my TikToks are 60 seconds, but I've really been trying to now connect everything to capital because like people think these interventions are bad and they just hate the US. But I'm like, well, it's not necessarily the US, right? Like, didn't you wrote an essay once before you read theory saying that wars happen because the US is exporting nationalism all over the world? It's like, no, that's not what it is. It's capital getting exported all over the world. You can't understand what's going on without an understanding of capitalism's inherent contradictions. Obviously, that's Marxism, and that's why it's easier to argue those things, I think, because you're arguing what's true and what's been discovered, and what we know about capitalism through a scientific understanding of the system itself.
Yeah, and that's sort of the Tulsi phenomenon, where she was framing a sort of pseudo anti-imperialist framework through like anti-regime change wars. And the thing is that you can't realize the impossibility of that unless you understand the dynamic of the necessity for capital to expand and find new markets and new resources and stuff. So we have a population that is very very disenchanted by the political arena. They don't trust the media. They don't trust either party, and they agree on things like not sending their kids to die or have visible or non-visible injuries in war. And they do realize that at the end of the day, war really doesn't benefit us. I'm not benefited by brown kids in the Middle East being bombed, and I don't think any other working class person in the country is. So I think there's so many different areas of discontent, and they're all in one form or another related to the system that we have and its necessity to expand. And if we're just able to connect it, I think it's just a click. There's a good poem by Brecht. I think it's called the Simple Thing That's Hard to Do, and that's really our task right now. It's sort of a simple task because it's very easy relating how having your kids sent out to war to die is a result of capitalism. It's very easy to relate how not being able to get a medical treatment in a country that has an abundance that they could do that for free, how that's related to capitalism. All of these things are very easy to do, but it's also hard to do in a certain way. But we know that if we're able to do this, if we're able to have that subjective condition click, that's it. It's a house of cards, and if you pull the right one out, the whole thing is crumbling. So
I think on top of that, one more point of strategy is the left needs to understand propaganda in a way, not propaganda to spread lies, but propaganda to spread truth, because the right are unabashed liars and they're backed by billions and billions of dollars, right? But the ultimate disadvantage that they're in is they have to convince their supporters to actively be against their own material well-being, right? Whereas we are trying to get people to stand up for themselves and fight to make their lives better and the society they live in better. So we need to use, any form of messaging that we can to get our messages out to people, and then use any tools we have for organizing to do so. Like, and not to pat myself on the back, but like that's what I'm trying to do with like TikTok. Like, it's the most popular form of social media right now. Why would I not use it to spread communism? Like, even though it seems kind of goofy, like we need to use all the tools at our disposal, but then also realize nothing actually happens through the internet. Like, we also have to get out there and actually do stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I think the left is just soft as hell, man. They're like that one Parenti speech where he's mocking them. The day after the revolution, the liberals are like, "Are you gonna let the fascists have their newspapers?" Like, it's so funny. Like, the left is so soft, dude. Like, we need to get our message out there, and we need to destroy like these Koch brother, Ferris bro funded, or Wilkes brothers funded right-wing media apparatus poisoning our country and dumping money into the best universities in the country to spread right-wing ideology.
That was a excellent Parenti voice.
Thank you. I've
But
watched
yeah,
it.
absolutely. I absolutely agree. When there's no one can make fun of organizing through TikTok when in 1 minute you're able to connect something that people feel very passionate about in their everyday life to capitalism, and do so in a way in which I think you have videos where like 500,000 people have seen it. So that's just absolutely insane. The fact that some people will neglect certain platforms that we can use for tactical organizing. But there is a right way and there is, a wrong way. And there's definitely some people that I don't think are doing it in the best way possible. But I, yeah, the phenomena that the sort of loophole for organizing that you found through TikTok, I think it's revolutionary in itself. Um, but
It's
yeah, we do have to
yeah.
get better at propagandizing, and I think we need to be able to also have a consistent critical lens. We have the vast majority of the left. I think the biggest organization we have right now is DSA. It's got like 80,000 or 90,000 members now. Um, they don't necessarily have an anti-imperialist outlook. And the most important thing you have to have as a socialist, especially within the empire, is an anti-imperialist outlook. They've held conferences where they've been anti-Maduro, anti-Cuba, um, they're anti-China, right? And they're not doing critique from a position where the left should do critique. You recently just did an article critiquing Maduro, and that's a fair critique. Um, or if but they seem to be selectively critical. They're critical of certain parts of the media. They're able to pull when the media is cheating Bernie or whatever, and they're able to pull certain lies from the media and understand it critically. But then when it comes to other countries, specifically socialist countries, they lack the ability to expand the critical lens abroad. And whether that's some sort of racism or whatever the case may be, we have to be able to address that. Because even though I do think that the left has to unite, it absolutely has to, under a common agenda to gain power for the working class. I don't think it's going to be fruitful aligning with people who are taking directly imperialist points of view, and who are propagating imperialist propaganda within our circles. Those
Yeah.
sorts of it's what Lenin called deviation and left wing communism. Those sorts of deviations are not helpful. There could be other sorts of deviations, but deviations that just completely miss the mark cannot be accepted.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's really frustrating to see the discourse and the left around Venezuela. And I was talking to our young friend Simon today, and I was like, or he was saying, I don't get it. People cannot spot propaganda as it's happening. And I was saying, like, yeah, people now look back and they say Iraq is bad, Afghanistan's bad, Libya is bad, Syria was bad. But when they were pushing for those things, like Assad dictator, Gaddafi dictator, Saddam dictator, bad, need to overthrow. It's like in the case of Saddam, he actually was a brutal dictator, but the answer is not to go in and overthrow them. And then in the case of Assad and Gaddafi, it was much more complicated than these people are just evil dictators. You know, you can have your critiques of them and their human rights abuses, but Libyans had the highest standard of living of any country in Africa, and now they have an open air slave market, and more refugees are fleeing from there than I think any other country in the world. Same was the case in Syria. And when now people can maybe look back and say those were bad, but there were tons of people on the left, calling anyone who said we shouldn't intervene in Libya a dictator defender, a defender of Gaddafi. You can see it on any of my TikTok videos where I talk about any leader we've overthrown. I get called a dictator defender, and a lot of people like that. You know, they agree that I'm being a dictator defender. It's like, and people can't realize that they're being sold atrocity propaganda when it's actually happening. Like the most recent example being the Uyghurs. The government wants war with China, so they blame them of doing the most horrendous atrocity imaginable. And then when you look into it, it's much more nuanced. You know, you could disagree with the policy of re-education camps, but it's far from the genocide and ethnic cleansing that it's made out to be in the Western media. And the sources for these claims are coming from Adrian Zenz, a man who said he's on a mission from God to destroy China. It's like you said, there's a xenophobic, racist element to it as well. And it's so sad that the left can't realize this. And the other thing I'm tired of with the left, and hopefully we're going to get to interview Caleb Maupin soon, is they don't think the cancel culture thing is real. It's like, guys, I get right-wing pundits are like lunatics, but like they win people over by saying that the left does cancel culture, because the left actually does cancel culture. Like they've tried to cancel Caleb, who does like, I think Caleb's analysis of the economy is super valuable, but I'm supposed to hate him and not listen to anything he says because he once interviewed a guy who doesn't like trans people, and it's like, yeah, I don't agree with the transphobic views at all, but I'm not just going to dismiss Caleb's analysis of the economy because of something he's done in the past. And it's become such a big trend on the left, and they refuse to acknowledge it. They're too sensitive to do any self-critique, I feel like, and look at where we're going wrong. Yeah, and the last thing I want to say about that is during the Bernie campaign, they would make me delete my tweets all the time. Our buddy, I guess I shouldn't reveal his name. He probably doesn't care, but our boss, who is actually just our buddy, would text me all the time. Can you delete this? Can you delete this? And like now that the Bernie campaign's not going on, I have 95K followers and we have a huge website and stuff. And it's like, not huge, but we have a decent following. It's like, why were you censoring me? Like, let us speak, let's not be the anti-free speech, snowflakes that the right wing makes us out to be. Let's embrace discourse and, opposing views. Let's not embrace bigotry, of course, like always reject that and call it out. But also, here's the other thing is if you have a Republican person with a couple bigoted social views and then you cancel them and never talk to them, they're going to go hang out with other bigots. But if you meet them where they're at and you try and explain things to them and you meet them with love and understanding, you have a chance of changing their bigoted views, Otherwise, they're lost for good and they're probably going to go further down the right-wing rabbit hole.
Yeah, especially considering the sort of developments that has taken part in the elites of our country, the oligarchs, the capitalists, that are behind the Democratic Party are quite liberal, and a lot of the workers that are disenfranchised by the Democratic Party are there not because of certain economic policies that first of all, the Democratic Party doesn't have economic policies that are, anything substantially left of the Republican Party, but they're disenfranchised by the sort of liberal framework. And the thing is that has led not just the Democrats, but the left overall in the US, I think ever since the 60s, to just basically ignore the working class. They call them bigots and stuff. And it's like, even if they are, okay, that's horrible. But you don't defeat a bigot by letting him just run around. Because, like you said, he's just going to go to other bigots. You defeat him by addressing them and helping them understand how their bigotry, which if we actually analyze it through the lens of class, their bigotry is a result of a hardship they're facing as a working class who has been abandoned and who has no representation. It's very easy to have then a Republican come and tell you that your enemy is a Muslim, a Mexican, a black person, a gay person, a trans person. We have it might sound sort of ancient or whatever, but I do believe there is such thing as truth. And what these people experience in their economic life, the fact that they experience a dictatorship every day when they go to work, they experience the tyranny of their boss. That's something universal. That's in German there's this word for experience that Erfahrung, which is experience that is a sort of general experience. And that's what it is. That's what these people experience, and that's what the working class in the U.S. experiences. And if we're just gonna avoid going to them because they have bigoted views, one, we're not gonna ever be able to change those bigoted views, right? And two, we're not gonna ever be able to have a revolution without a working class, right? And I think that's that's probably the biggest problem. I know that at least at the start, that was one of the aims of our project. We've had to expand as we've expanded. At the moment, we're getting like 20,000 or something views a week, but we sort of realized that what was predominant in the left was an anti-working class socialism, right? And we saw it in figures in DSA, the leading figures, that the socialism that they're really proposing excludes the working class. It's a sort of petty bourgeois socialism. And yeah, it focuses a lot on good progressive issues of identity, which I mean we would agree with, but in its decentralization of class and its neglecting of workers, there is no revolutionary potential. At least it's not the type of socialism that I want to live under. So yeah, we definitely have to go to these mass of people and organize them. And again, it gets back to sort of what the goal of today's talk was, to hopefully if party members from whichever organization in the US are watching this, to promote an agenda that gets to the workplace to propagandize, and that doesn't do it like just for just to propagandize, but that actually goes there, earns the respects of working people, and is able to do that, right? Because if we're outside, if all of the people that are in these organizations are like petty bourgeois, and they go address workers, there's not going to be that relationship of respect that you have when you're in the same workplace, experiencing the same sorts of struggles, and recognizing that sort of solidarity that exists there. So I think we've circled around to where we started, which is the necessity to go where the workers are, and organize from there, and not just be scared by the flaws, but take it as a challenge, right? Don't look away just because a white worker has certain bigoted views, right? Help them move away from that, right? And in the process, help them realize who the real enemy is. And that's what's going to actually contribute something to the movement. We're not contributing anything. We're just ignoring people because they have views that are wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. What was I gonna say? I want to say something funny before we went. Oh yeah, I probably got to get to bed because I got work at 5 a.m. tomorrow. Because I'm a true proletarian. I got to go hang out with old people at the gym. But did you see that TikTok of me talking about Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party? Speaking of people being canceled from the left, claiming they're claiming cancel culture doesn't exist. Meanwhile, the Bernie Sanders of the UK is being canceled for being pro-Palestine. But I did a video about that on TikTok, and this girl from the UK duetted it, just like throwing it back, like twerking while I talk about Jeremy Corbyn. It is hilarious. It's my favorite response I've ever gotten.
Yeah, that's another perfect example. Yeah, it's to call Corbyn anti-Semitic is like the Republicans that are calling Biden a communist. It's completely not based on anything. But yeah, I think it was a fruitful talk. It went on the longer side, but I think that there's a lot of information that that whoever's watching this, we hope to have reached you um, and maybe struck a chord in the sort of framework that you're using for tactical organizing. And we're not gonna have a revolution in the U.S. Um, if we continue the way we're going. We do have to realize that there's immense pressure. There's historical pressure of constant anti-communism and anti-communist propaganda. But we also have to self-reflect and see what it is that we are doing wrong. And I think that we can start from there, fixing the mistakes that we're doing. And I think we've touched on quite a few. Um, I think for those unaffiliated leftists who are not in either party, I'll explain why I mentioned this after. But one of the things we have to realize is that in the U.S. we have a rich tradition of socialism, of all strands, honestly, and part of the anti-communist propagandizing is making communism seem as, essentially anti-American. Um, and once you read the history of socialism in the U.S., communism in the U.S., you realize sort of how Cornel West says that, there's um, socialism is as American as apple pie. Um, so I know that new new young people that are coming to the left and that are beginning to read theory, it's very easy to fetishize figures. Um, I mean, I've done it, so I'm not like judging, but um, it's going to be very hard to lead a revolutionary movement if the figures that we're proposing as socialism is like Mao. And
Right.
I'm the first one that will tell anyone, yeah, you have to read Mao. It's absolutely essential. His contributions are excellent, right? I'm the first one to tell you, you have to read Marx, you have to read Lenin, at least the essential stuff. But uh, aesthetics is pretty important in the society we're living in. We live in a society that sort of its symbols have taken the place that content used to take, right? So the symbolic expression is very important, and we're not going to reach the working mass if we are proposing these figures of socialism, which we might love. We realize that they're the core of our ideas, but if we have people in the U.S. who said the same thing, even if they said it afterwards, we have to use those people. Because when you go up to a working class person and you're telling them about socialism and you're using Big Bill Hayward, who was an American miner, right? That sort of relational capacity is a lot different than if I go up to them and I'm talking to them about Lenin. Um, and not just in the fact that Big Bill was an American, but also connected to the fact that with that is that sort of demysticizing demysticizing that sort of socialism as anti-American.
Yeah, and it doesn't even, it's got to be based on the material conditions. So you got to realize what figures have been demonized, and Big Bill Haywood's a great example. One that popped to my mind that I've seen people using is Thomas Sankara, because he hasn't been demonized in the same way, and he essentially lived a near flawless life, and refused to do any forms of authoritarianism, as he turned his country socialist, and as a result of not doing more authoritarianism and cracking down on his bodyguard who was working with the CIA, he was killed and chopped up, and that's a good figure to use, as someone who, like, that's the kind of society we're kind of trying to build, is the kind of vision that Sankara had. And he had a vision for a pan-African currency, where all the African countries wouldn't be so dependent on the United States, like, and he just hasn't been demonized the same way that others have. So, like, I don't know, he's a cool figure to use, and you just got to be smart about it, right? Like, people in the US think Stalin is the same thing as the devil. Like, you're not gonna be like, hey, you should read historical and dialectical materialism to a construction worker, what the fuck you talking about? It's like, Stalin, you psychopath, but it is what it is. We just gotta be smart about what we're putting out there here in the American left and the imperial core.
Yeah, and I mean, it's absolutely. I think that angle is super important. Is also the fact that we're gonna get nowhere if we don't see the steps that have already been taken before us in our context. As part of reading and using these figures aesthetically, it's not just the fact that it removes the sort of socialism as anti-American, but it's also the fact that these people were trying to build socialism in the US, right? And even though that's 100 years ago now, it's more similar to us than what, like, the Russian Revolution was, at least in terms of material conditions, or the Chinese Revolution. So it helps us really understand, where was it that we succeeded? Where was it that we failed? What sort of ideological splits led to certain fragmentations, which, if that wouldn't have happened, we would have had a stronger movement in 10 years instead of what, I was reading, and I think in 1893 or something, the AFL had passed a resolution for economic democracy to socialize the industrial sector. And De Leon wanted to tactically do something else, and he created another union there that was tied to the Socialist Labor Party. And although that seemed as a sort of tactical good move at the time, it really destroyed something that could have been pretty cool. If the AFL would have taken a socialist stance that early and developed from that, it would have been interesting. So part of retracing our past isn't just the sort of beneficial aesthetic element, which is absolutely essential, but also the fact that we're able to see, where have we failed, where have we succeeded, and how can we use this in our material conditions? Because the US has such a unique position in the world, and it's, if we don't embrace our tradition and learn from those that came before us and failed and succeeded in different areas, we're not going to be doing too good. If everything we're reading is from outside, although it's important in capitalism, sort of spreads across the planet and works in similar ways everywhere, it's still very important to read the people in our tradition. So that's one of the things that I urge anyone listening to do. Read the works of Daniel De Leon, read the works of Foster, read the works of Harry Haywood, and all of the other figures in the 19th and 20th century American left. Read Thomas Paine. I mean, for God's sakes. Huh?
And most importantly, read Eddie Smith and Carlos Garrido.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I would say probably, like, if our brains combined, we would be smarter than Marx. There's a meme where a guy's brain is growing out of his head, and his brain turns into another person who's then playing him in chess, and the chessboard is also made out of his brain, and that is us.
That's like the ultimate phenomenological fetish. Like you reflect so hard, you literally grow a person on your brain, and now you're looking down on yourself. And but yeah, no, I mean, we'd probably have to do that and multiply it by like 10 to get to Marx. But yeah, I think it's been a worthwhile talk. And so important. If whoever is still listening, thank you for making it this far. And I want to urge you that if you support our project, we have a few things coming. We have a journal that's going to be releasing around January 15. We have book ideas for the future, people we're going to bring along, graphic designers that we have to bring along. So our expenses are going to go up, and we are going to, we want to have our growing viewership sort of corresponding to our development, and we need funds to do that. So if you're interested, and if you can, please consider becoming a Patreon. It really is going to help. And if you can't, sharing our content is absolutely free, and that is still excellent and highly appreciated.
Yes, thank you all for that. Sign my petition too.
Sign Eddie's petition is on the TikTok link, and the TikTok is Eddie Liger Smith. So go check that out. Follow the boy. He's going to be hitting 100,000 followers soon, and he says he's going to do something crazy. I don't even know what he's going to do, but I'm starting to get scared. So yeah.
I might shop him for.
What?
I might shotgun a Four Loko. We will see. I don't want that to make me lose all my credibility as like a potential politician, but also I think that would just make people really respect me. They'd be like, I feel like I can have a beer with that, or I feel like I could beer bong a Four Loko with them. Really appeal to the average American.
Yeah, I after seeing Lucho Arce play guitar, I feel like I can relate to him at a whole, different level. So maybe the Four Loko idea is the straw that breaks the camel's back, and right after we have a full nationalization of the economy. But
direct correlation.
Yeah. All right, Eddie, thank you for coming along and talking. I know it's pretty late and you're a busy man. So it was a pleasure.
Thank you, my friend.
In the chat.
I appreciate you. All right, I gotta get to sleep.
All right, definitely. See ya.
Peace.